Good morning and welcome to the GLNP conference on nature recovery in Greater Lincolnshire. Hope you enjoyed that initial video from Jack Haig, who's a wildlife photographer and videographer and did a fantastic job of capturing Fiskerton Fen, one of the beautiful wild places that we have in Greater Lincolnshire. So I'm going to hand over to our Vice Chair, Richard Chadd, for our opening statement.
Well, good morning, everybody. Thank you for attending today. For those of you that were expecting David Hickman, the chair, to be chairing this session, he's having IT issues, bless him, as is one of the, obviously the downsides of having online conferences. The upside is that we've got loads more people attending this conference than we've ever had before. Usually we get around about 100, we've got about 150 registered in for this, so that's a good thing. So thank you for attending. Today you'll be aware that the theme of the meeting is about nature recovery. So we want to give examples and start conversations about nature recovery, both with examples from within the county and outside the county as well. We'll also be showcasing some of the tools that the GLNP have to help our partners with nature recovery projects, which I'm sure will garner a great deal of interest. So I hope you enjoy the day. I have to do the obligatory housekeeping, even though you're in your own houses, essentially. Obviously, you don't have to worry about fire exits apart from your own. You're all of you on mute apart from the panelists, so you don't have to worry about muting yourself, or if you start getting noises off screen, because we won't hear you. It's all automatically done. Do feel free to use the chat function to introduce yourself, so we can see who's around, but don't use the chat function for questions. Please can you use the Q&A function if you want to ask any questions. If you're looking to ask a question to a particular speaker, can you make sure that you state which speaker you're aiming the question at? If you hit like on a question, it'll put it higher up the order. So if there's a question that lots of people want to hear the answer for, that will prioritize it for you. Anything we can't answer on the day, or if we run out of time, we will email you an answer back if we are able to do so. So as you know, this is all being recorded, so it will be emailed out with a newsletter within 2 weeks of the conference happening. So if you miss any of it for whatever reason, there will be an opportunity for you to see it again if you wish. So I think that's everything for me. I'll hand straight back to Charlotte to do the first part of the conference. So this is, why do we need nature recovery? Charlotte.
Great, thanks ever so much, Richard. Thank you for stepping in last minute with those IT issues. And I think I just had a slight one with sharing screen at the start, so hopefully everyone can see everything clearly now. Also, just again, quick thank you to Jack Haig, who put together that video at the start, if any of you managed to catch that just as you were signing in. I will play that again in the tea break and probably over the lunch break so everyone can see. I think it's just a nice bit of inspiration about why we're looking for nature recovery, why we all work in the environmental sector. So yeah, I quite liked seeing that at the start. The order of the day is as follows. There are no changes, I don't think, to what has been emailed out recently and come in your follow-up. So I'm going to start just with why do we actually need nature recovery? If I can get my slide to move along. Okay, so I do want to start by saying thank you for coming along today. I've only really recently joined the GLNP, so I started at the end of September. I'm the new GLNP manager for any of the partners I haven't spoken to. You know, I've not managed to meet many people at all, so I hope that will change as we start to see a light at the end of the tunnel with COVID-19, that I will be able to speak to many more of you and be able to meet more of you across the partnership. But I'm so pleased with how many people have come along today. To have 150 people register for this webinar is fantastic. That's more than we've had at any conference the GLNP conference has had previously. This is the first time we have run this online, so yeah, hopefully we won't have too many technical issues, but please do forgive us if we do. So really, I just want to set the scene for the conference today, start some conversations and think about ideas that could come from the projects that we're presenting today. You may find much of what I'm saying in this presentation are things that you've heard before. I imagine most people that have come along to this are interested in the environmental sector as a minimum, enjoy nature, enjoy all of these things that I'm going to be talking about anyway. But I do think it's important to focus on exactly why we need to move to nature recovery instead of just conservation in this country, and take stock of where we are, take stock of what has happened to really learn lessons from the past. So I'm going to lead with that, looking at the UK as a whole, and then focus on Greater Lincolnshire and think about the challenges and the opportunities that we have here for nature recovery. So despite huge efforts from the environmental sector over recent decades, studies have shown that we are living in one of the world's most nature depleted countries in the world. Just to give a few kind of statistics, and these are all pretty sad to look at, but 15% of the species in Great Britain are currently threatened with extinction, with 133 recently going extinct. 30% of our birds are threatened with extinction. They'll put this picture in of kind of, some birds flying off into the sunset, but apparently the RSPB have estimated that 40 million birds have disappeared from our skies since the 1970s. And then looking at our seas, we're a fantastic island surrounded by sea, and 92% of our seagrass beds have gone in the last century. Really fantastic that later on in the day we're going to be having a presentation about talking about some regeneration of seagrass beds. Actually looked at a statistic globally that the rate of seagrass beds is about 2 football pitches per hour, which I found really staggering and really sad. I think it's clear to see from everyday life that wildlife is declining, and these statistics that we've got here are really shocking. But I think really it just highlights that now we need nature recovery. We are in an emergency, and now is the time for us to really take action. And this movement for nature recovery has been recognised across the country. There's national campaigns, and there's lots of pledges to put nature back into recovery. So just as an example, the Wildlife Trusts have put together their 30-30-30 campaign. So the Wildlife Trusts are calling for at least 30% of our land and sea to be connected and protected for nature's recovery by 2030. So we've only got 9 years to go for this. Making more space for nature to become abundant once again will give our struggling wildlife the chance to recover and also restore beautiful wild places that will store carbon as well to help us tackle the climate crisis that we are also facing. So the Wildlife Trust state that this 30% really is the bare minimum for nature to start recovering, and at the moment we are far short of that target. So to give some context to this, the Lincolnshire Wildlife Trust owns and manages about 0.5% of Greater Lincolnshire. Now, I'm not in any way saying that is the only protected areas we have within the county, of course it's not, but I think that just gives us a little bit of an idea of what we've got ahead of us. So looking into this national campaign, Craig Bennett has said that the next 10 years must be a time of renewal, of rewilding our lives, of green recovery. We all need nature more than ever, and when we succeed in reaching 30 by 30, we'll have wilder landscapes that store carbon and provide on your doorstep nature for people too. Everybody can support and help us succeed in this. I think that's a really fantastic statement, and really sums up what we can be looking forward to in the future as well. So, how can we achieve a future full of nature in our country? The UK government in the 25-year Environment Plan have set out major commitment for creating a nature recovery network. So working on the Lawton principles of more, bigger, better and joined, which I'm sure many of us have heard many times and think about as we're looking at nature recovery. DEFRA and Natural England are bringing together partners, legislation and funding to create the Nature Recovery Network. Together, they will deliver a network of restoring and enhancing England's rich wild places. Their aim is to expand, improve and connect these places across our towns, cities and countryside. Later on this afternoon, I'll be talking about the GLNP's nature strategy and how we really see that working for Greater Lincolnshire. So to look at the objectives of Nature Recovery Network across the country is to restore 75% of protected sites on land to a favourable condition so nature can thrive. So at the moment, even though we have areas that are protected, that doesn't necessarily mean that they are in a good state for nature and for wildlife. To create and restore 500,000 hectares of additional wildlife rich habitat outside protected areas. So we need more. Our protected areas are not enough. We need to create more habitat, restore more habitat. Recover threatened and iconic animal and plant species by providing more diverse and better connected habitats. Connecting up our habitats, making our habitats climate resilient so that our wildlife is able to move across the landscape. Support work to increase woodland cover. We know that we're also facing a climate crisis, and increasing our woodland cover will help with that. And achieve a range of environmental, economic and social benefits such as carbon capture, flood management, clean water, pollination and recreation. Essentially getting our landscape to start working together again. So looking 20 years in the future, what can we hope for our landscape? And the Wildlife Trust put together this lovely graphic, which I have kindly borrowed from them, and some thoughts on what we might be able to have in our future. And I thought it'd be really nice to share. I must say, looking at this landscape and reading some of this description I'm going to go through, it really has put on a smile on my face and really makes me hope that this is what we will have in 20 years' time. So in this landscape, nature is normal. Children grow up with trees to climb, ponds to investigate, and fields to explore. They don't know it, but their childhood is much better than their parents' was. Green developments have been happening for 20 years. All new housing and other developments have resulted in net gain for wildlife. Wilder cities, green roofs, green walls, pocket parks, and trees are common. Buzzing countryside, farmland is crisscrossed by colourful habitat, and for its most important wild residents, the pollinators. We have sustainable fisheries. After 2 decades of protection, the UK seas have regained much of their former bounty. All fishing is sustainable and jobs are secure. Sights of whales and other large creatures that used to be common are now increasing. Fertile soils, the most productive land, is renewing itself. Nutrients are staying in the soil and accumulating rather than eroding and blowing away. Restored uplands instead of just closed grazed grasslands. The trees and peat bogs are back, reducing flooding and locking up CO2 from the air. I just thought that these were really fantastic thoughts and really what I hope to see in our future. So I thought it was a really good thing to share, and I just can't wait to see this happen, and I can't wait to see this happen across Greater Lincolnshire. So I'm sure for everyone attending this conference, nature is an important part of your life already and something that you intrinsically value. But for many people in the UK, a love for nature is a new thing and has come off the back of COVID-19, and our access to nature as being really our only way of being able to get outside and relax. In 2019, Nature published findings on access to green space with health and well-being. For us, it seems like common sense, but it really has been such a understudied area until recently. The study looked at self-reported health and well-being in nearly 20,000 people, showing that just 120 minutes of recreational contact with nature per week significantly improved health and well-being. And this was consistent across age groups and people suffering from long-term illness. So looking at the State of Nature report, even before COVID-19, public support for the environmental sector was increasing. The State of Nature report published in 2019 stated that in the last 10 years, the amount of time that people have volunteered to help with environmental projects has increased by 46%. It's clear more people want to be involved and more people are willing to give their time to help. And I think as a partnership, what we can do is give people the tools and information to allow them to help, from their back gardens to their communities to everything else. Coming out of COVID-19 pandemic, we must build a greener future. now really is the time for action. We have the ear of the public, and that's something that we need to use, and we need to ride on that appreciation for nature. The increased number of people accessing nature definitely hasn't come without its issues. One I've personally witnessed, as I imagine most people in the conference have, is the amount of litter that's been happening when people have been accessing nature. It was reported in The Guardian that in a normal year, the Peak District spends £38,000 picking up litter, which already seems like an absolutely huge amount of money. But this year, coming out of the pandemic, they expect to shell out double that. I know from speaking to other members of staff at the Lincolnshire Wildlife Trust that they've experienced the same and have been working tirelessly to keep our reserves clean and in a good state for nature. So there are definitely hurdles, there's no doubt about that, but I can't help but be positive that the number of people appreciating nature has increased and starting to see that as part of their everyday life. And that is something that we all should have, and this shouldn't be a privilege, it should be a right to be able to access nature. So we've looked at this from a kind of nationwide point of view and what the environmental movement is doing at the moment. I want to have a little bit of a look at Greater Lincolnshire. So many people will say to you that Lincolnshire is a very flat county. We all know it's very rural, very agricultural. We've got huge amounts of open spaces and lots of sky. When I was going to move to Lincolnshire, so I've lived in Lincolnshire for about 12 years now, but just before I moved, I met somebody who was from Lincolnshire, and she said a lot of people will tell you that Lincolnshire is very flat, but it's actually just 70% sky. And that's something I always remembered and always really liked, and always I appreciate it a lot more, I think, because of that. So with so many fields and open space, I was shocked at the Natural England report that Lincolnshire is actually rated as the second worst county for access to nature. Seems counterintuitive with our open spaces that we have all across the county. But it's clear from the statistics that people from Lincolnshire don't access nature as much as other areas in the country. To think that we have the same level as London seems absolutely mad when we're such a rural county. Now, there will be a complicated mix of reasons behind why people aren't accessing nature, but the point is clear. Everyone needs nature, and access to green space is positive for health and well-being. So we need to build this into our plans and our processes for nature recovery. Access to nature should be a right and part of everyday life, and not a luxury for those that are able to get in a car and go to a nature reserve or national park. So we must connect up our landscape and the green space so the green spaces can reach everybody. Greater Lincolnshire produces 20% of the UK's food, from sugar beet to barley, potatoes to cabbages, some of the things that the county is famous for, like Lincolnshire sausages, plum bread and poacher cheese, and hayslet. I'm sorry if I have not said that correctly. As I said, I'm not originally from Lincolnshire. But local food and farming is part of the identity of Lincolnshire, of Greater Lincolnshire, certainly. Unfortunately, and I don't want to say this to be negative, but just to acknowledge the challenges that we have in our county, unfortunately, the biggest impact on nature in the past 50 years has been from intensification of agriculture. And as a large and highly agricultural county, this means we really need big changes in our future. As I said, I don't highlight this to be negative in any way, but just to look at what our challenges are. There'll be many other examples of this, I'm sure, and there'll be plenty of people on the conference thinking of other examples, but just one would be that the Lincolnshire Wildlife Trust are already starting along this road, leading 2 ELMS tests, so developing 2 ELMS tests, one in the Humberhead Levels and one in South Lincolnshire. Another example would be for anybody that's watched the recent episode of Countryfile that was based in Lincolnshire, that looked at the hedgerow planting and the development of new local businesses that are working alongside nature. So these changes have already started to happen, and as a partnership we will be able to help along with these. So Greater Lincolnshire is a county of history, culture and outstanding natural places. From the Humber to the Wash, the Fens, the Wolds, the beautiful coast, Gibraltar Point, and of course the seals at Donanook. Got to be got to be everybody's favourite. I think as a strong nature partnership from such a large, varied and special county as Lincolnshire, that we really can have an impact on nature recovery in the UK, and that we can be leaders on how this is achieved. And I hope that out of today we can share more about what is happening of nature recovery across the county and work together. with our partners ranging from the councils, Lincoln University, the Bird Club, the Wildlife Trust. This is just to name a few of our 48 partners that we have. We really do have a huge amount of expertise, knowledge and influence. And I hope, as I said, that we carry on these conversations after today. The rest of the today, you will hear from projects from inside and outside of the county, so that we can learn about what is already happening inside the county and seeing what other people are doing and share knowledge. Later on today, I'll be speaking again in the afternoon to highlight the tools that the GLNP have for developing nature recovery. So I have put my email address here for anybody who doesn't already have it. I imagine most people do. I will be producing a newsletter after the conference, and there will be a video of the whole conference as well. So if you'd like to be on the newsletter mailing list, then just send me an email. All of our partners will automatically get this. But yes, I would just like to say thank you for coming along today. Thank you for all of our partners for being here and being part of the partnership, and anybody that's joined us that is outside of the partnership. Really fantastic that you're here as well. And I'm really looking forward to hearing the rest of the presentations and thinking how we can apply this to Greater Lincolnshire. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Charlotte. That set the scene superbly. We move on now to Lloyd Park, who is the Kenhill conservation leader and ecologist. The title of his talk is Wild Kenhill. I confess that when I first saw the running order, I thought that was the name of the speaker, but that's just me. So, Lloyd, are you ready to join us?
Lovely. Thank you very much, Richard. And, thank you, Charlotte. I'll just share my. Oh, let me just share my screen. There we go. Hopefully everyone can see that. So yeah, thank you very much. Yes, my name's Lloyd Park. I'm working as the conservation leader and ecologist for Kenhill. I recently started with the estate back in October. Prior to that, I'd worked for the Leicestershire and Rutland Wildlife Trust for 13 years on a range of species monitoring and wildlife recording projects. And yeah, I saw this opportunity come up at Kenhill. Knew a little bit about the area, having been a regular birder to this part of Norfolk for many years, and thought I'll come along and have a look and see what it's all about. And I'm going to share with you today just some of the work that we're doing here, and it's really positive stuff for wildlife and for nature and for people. So where are we? We are on the northwest coast of Norfolk. We are a farm, effectively, just over 4,000 acres that is owned by the Buskell family. This is was traditionally a estate purchased back in the 17th century as a shooting estate that has remained within the family and has progressed as time has gone on into much the same way as lots of other pieces of land, split up, farmed, all sorts of different sort of management techniques and strategies. And it's quite a small team of people we've got here on the estate, and the sort of background, I guess, behind this project is the estate's always been farmed very sympathetically for wildlife. It's a very rich wildlife area, and Dominic, who is one of the project leads here at Kenhill, took a sabbatical from work he was doing in London, spent a year working on the estate with the team, and decided that actually, there was a lot to this, and he could bring a lot to the estate. And we're sort of moving on to where we are now. So without focusing too much on the doom and gloom, as we all know, we're facing some massive challenges with loss of biodiversity and obviously the climate crisis being a major impact for all of us. And also from a farming point of view, we were facing the loss of subsidies from leaving the EU and the implications that will potentially have on Kenhill as we move forward. So after Dominic spent his years on sabbatical working on the estate and these becoming very passionate about these issues, we started looking at ways that we can really make a difference and make a change. And what we've done here is come up with a a fairly radical response to these changes in quite a short period of time. So this is the estate broken down a bit closer together. So we have segmented the estate into sort of 3 core sections, if you like, and I'll focus on each one of these in turn. But first and foremost, we've become fairly well known for the rewilding project. So this rewilding block in the middle is 1,000 acres of ex-arable land and mixture of woodland. It's about 500 acre split of each, and we've entered this into our rewilding plot, which, as I say, we're becoming more and more popular because of the term rewilding. Now, I think it's important to remember that rewilding means something different, I think, to everybody, and it's it's certainly a learning step. It's a new thing for everybody here on the estate, but it's hopefully having some really positive impacts for biodiversity and for people. The second area is this lovely purple area you can see, which is our 2,000 acres of farming estate, and we've entered into a regenerative agriculture, which I'll explain a bit more about. And for me, as a conservationist and ecologist, it's I think for me it was a massive eye-opener coming onto the estate and seeing the changes of farming practices and how they can really benefit, and we can farm hand in hand with wildlife. And the other area that we've split down is our traditional areas of conservation. So we realise here at the project that we've got areas that historically are really important species rich habitats, and it's really important to conserve those and maintain those. So we've broken down the estate into these 3 sections, and all are being managed in very different ways. So first and foremost, so the rewilding. So we've kind of had to focus our efforts into various different segments. First of all, is to understand the ecology of the site. So we are obviously not the first to do this. There are other rewilding projects that are going on in the UK, and obviously as we step into that, we turn to them for advice and look at that. And we worked closely with the NEP estate in the early stages. And one of the key pieces of advice they gave us was understand what is on your site. So we were very fortunate, and a guy called Graham Lyons, who works for senior ecologist for the Sussex Wildlife Trust, was brought on board early on in the project to basically understand what was on site and perform the baseline data surveys, which was, from my point of view, great. It's saved me a massive amount of work, and it's fantastic work that he's done. So I'm really thankful. In terms of species and species diversity for the estate, we are currently sitting at around 2,500 species recorded on the estate. So very similar to that of many of the larger nature reserves and things around. And this is after only just 2 years worth of recording work. One of the other elements that we've had to focus our areas on is the natural grazing. So why we chose the area of the estate that we did was the land before was relatively marginal farmland, so poor quality farmland. Some of the fields that I showed you in that first picture that were hatched out in the yellow would go from blow away sand to clay within a matter of meters in the same field. And they traditionally, from an agricultural point of view, were putting lots of product and chemical and stuff onto the soil to try and improve it or improve the quality of it. That we're at the stage where why on earth are we farming that land? And so we've changed that over. And so as we turn that land from agriculture back into what eventually will become a mosaic of scrub and open grassland areas, hopefully, and as the animals that we've introduced turn, so we've brought in natural grazing, and to do this we have used Exmoor ponies, red poll cattle, and Tamworth pigs. We've stocked relatively low densities to start with because this is a learning journey. We need to make sure that the densities aren't too high and aren't too low, and there's lots of parameters that we'll have to look at as to how we assess that. Species reintroductions, obviously, given the size and scope of the estate, we as conservationists sometimes have the opportunities to give nature a helping hand And one of the ways is through species reintroduction. So we have reintroduced beavers to the site, and we're potentially pursuing other species forward. Fencing and signage. Historically, the site's been a fairly open access site, even though it is a private estate. And so we're having to work now very hard with the sort of human wildlife conflicts that are presented on site. And also now that we're understanding the ecology of the site better, how we better protect those areas from the disturbance of people. So that's, as Charlotte mentioned in hers, there's always ongoing things between people. There's not always the positive, but hopefully positive outcomes to come out of it. Ending old practices. We are coming to the end of our forestry practices that are ongoing within that rewilding block. So we've still had a forestry agreement, and we've had to open up areas, and we wanted to open up areas to effectively create our woodland pasture, to get our animals in the woodlands grazing and doing the fantastic job that they need to do. Practices such as regular hedge flailing and things like that have all ceased. So all that land is now just being left to nature for nature's benefit. The other aspect is obviously the community engagement. One of the elements of my role as conservation leader and ecologist is to work with people, local or otherwise, to make nature more accessible to them, and show the great work that we're hopefully doing here. Working with partnerships. Obviously, being in a state of this size, it's hard to get by without. We're in a fantastically nature-rich area, and we have got lots of fantastic organisations on the doorstep, the RSPB Wildlife Trusts, University of East Anglia. So we are working with lots of different people in order to bring this all to fruition, which is really great. Lots of expertise coming in, and then continued. We're invested in continued monitoring how these changes are for the benefit of wildlife, and using technology to our advantage, I guess, in tracking wildlife and tracking the changes that happen on the site. So our approach in action. So yeah, all of this has been relatively quick. Back in 2018, we were in the process of entering into another period of countryside stewardship. And that was when, working closely with our Natural England advisor, the idea of the rewilding block was brought in on the marginal farmland. And as a result, by 2020, we had the first animals being brought into site as we've entered into that. And we're seeing changes already, drastic changes. You can see there from the slide the ash sapling that's popping through. So already on arable fields that are now just coming up to 2 years out of arable rotation, you start to see nature fighting back. These are ash saplings that are poking through the ground that's been heavily farmed for a long time. Photo there to the left of the screen is the rootling that the Tamworth pigs are doing, opening up their soil structure and creating some bare ground for vegetation and plants and things to come through, hopefully this spring and summer. And we can't get away from the fact that we've also got natural grazers here, also keeping this environment, but all 4 lots of animals there are all operating in very, very different ways and creating different structures on the site, which in turn will be interesting to follow. It's with all of these introduction of the animals, we've put GPS collars on one of the animals within each of the herds, so we've been able to plot over time the changes that these animals have on the area and where they're favouring and what they do. So it's really interesting to see that already, the cattle favour the ex-arable fields because there's easy fodder there. But as time comes on, or even the cold spell that we had, it was great to see the animals pushing into the winters and feeding on brambles and other things. So that's just a little snippet, I guess, of the rewilding approach that we're taking. And with that is the beavers. I mentioned earlier we reintroduced the beavers, so we have a 50-acre enclosure within the rewilding area, where beavers were brought in not last summer, the summer before, 2019. 2 females were brought in from the population in Scotland, and they were released into the pen, and 2 further males were brought down in September last year. And they've all been left to kind of do it and get on with it. And it's really interesting watching how the changes with them landscaping the environment on a sort of bigger scale for their own needs and how that benefits other things. So already this area where it was a piece of marshland many years ago that was drained and then planted as woodland. And these animals are obviously re-wetting ditches, and we're seeing things like water voles moving back into the beaver enclosure and moving into those pens. Really interestingly, the noticeable facts like the tree there that's been ring barked, there's very few trees that they've actually taken out within the closure. There's been lots of grazing and browsing for them. So we're not seeing massive amounts of deforestation or trees coming down straight away. These animals are, I'm still under the opinion that a lot of these trees are being ring barked to coppice them as opposed to bring them down at the moment, because all they do is take the bark off, and this will obviously send up a plethora of growth this next year, this spring and summer. So yeah, that's one of our elements of that, and I'll move on to some others as we progress. Our traditional conservation, we have an area of 500 acres of freshwater marsh here at the Ken Hill. And with Natural England's help, we embarked on a project to rejuvenate this piece of marshland. So it's been left mainly as grazing marsh for quite some time, but as a result has been drained for the benefit of grazing livestock, but to the detriment of the wildlife around. And it's a piece of land that still holds on to breeding redshank and oyster catchers and lapwing and little ring plover. So and avocet, and really, really important for all of those species. So what we wanted to try and do is improve that. So we embarked on this big landscaping project to resculpt the marshes effectively, and bring back lots of small pools and shallow scrapes, and put in 5 different sluices over the site so that we could control the water levels. Now, we're an interesting site because we can let water go easy enough, but we can't hold on to water. So all the water that's gaining for this piece of wetland comes from the rewilding area. So over time, it'd be interesting to see how the rewilding goes hand in hand with this. And as the drains and things break, that area becomes the rewilding area becomes an area of effectively a land reservoir, allowing water to filter through slowly, as opposed to through the ditches all in one big go. And the immediate impact of all this work has been very well received by the birds, as you can imagine. So we are managing this for breeding waders, which is what it's important for. Aside for that, it's obviously a very important area for wintering wildfowl. We're on the edge of the wash, fantastic area for birds anyway, but lots and lots of wildfowl using this over the winter months, which are an important tool as far as the management goes of the grazing of the marsh. We do have tenant cattle grazing it as well. We'd love to be able to graze our own cattle here, but we have issues with red waters, ticks and things that we can't graze our cattle here just yet. So maybe in time that's an option that we'll explore in the future. But it's getting that fine balance now right with this to make sure that it continues to produce the numbers of birds that we expect it to each year, and retain these areas that are really important for wildlife. And then the next area to move on to that third area is the regenerative agriculture. And for me, as a working in conservation for many years now, I was fortunate in my previous role to spend a lot of time in farmland and on estates throughout Leicestershire, Rutland and Northamptonshire. And one thing that becomes very clear as you spend more time out there, that it is a vast desert sometimes in some places, with places where wildlife should be and has frequented before in the past. And we kind of, I think here on the estate, we hold our hands up. We are farmers and have been farmers, and we have played part in that loss of biodiversity over the years through, just as farming practices changed. So we are now farming regeneratively. So that's some of the sort of core principles that go into it, understanding the context of the farm. So looking at how we can sequester carbon in the soils. That's obviously a big topic over the whole estate with everything that's happening within the rewilding area, but really important to understand on our farmland. How can we save on inputs that, minimize the amount of inputs that we're putting into land? What can we do? How can we maximize the amount of crops? Obviously, we still want to be able to produce food, and looking at all sorts of other ways that we can improve the health of the soil and benefit the wildlife around. And some of the ways that we're doing this are as follows. So we have fantastic estate manager, Nick Padwick, who is a real pioneer in the regenerative agriculture sector. And one of the biggest tools I think that it's been really important for the estate is our cover cropping regimes. So Nick has worked very, very hard to ensure the special changes within seed drill, so we can establish really good cover crop mix. So establishing good traditional heritage clover mixes and mixes with Phacelia. So things that are not only just suitable for pollinators, but are also fixing nitrogens into the soil. Low pesticides. When Nick started with the estate 3 years ago, he inherited a 7-year no insecticide regime from the previous manager, which is fantastic, and that's continued today. So we are now getting close to 10 years completely insecticide free, and 2 years hopefully of fungicide free. So we're trying to break those boundaries and break the amounts of that we're reliant upon chemicals or anything in the farming regime. Intercropping, different types of crops, polycropping, putting 2 different crops within fields, harvesting them together, minimizing the amount of time that we're on the land. So we only farm in rectangles now, so all fields are all rectangled off. So anything that's on the edge is either put down to a wild bird mix or a pollinator mix, or it's left as a sort of scrubby area to sort of regenerate. So all really positive things for wildlife. Every single field rectangle, regardless of that, has these lovely margins and headlands around them, which are full of insect rich flowers, full of pollinators, absolutely full of wildlife and birds. And I think it was very clear to me walking around in October time, I was blown away, just seeing every few footsteps, a pair of grey partridge or a small covey of grey partridge would take off and go across the fields. Kestrels were hunting on the headlands. Every so often, flocks of yellowhammers and linnets and mixed chaffinches sit and perch on the open tops of the hedgerows. So it sort of proves that things are right from looking at things that within my previous role and spending lots of time in farmland and just not seeing that wildlife visible. And a great big part of this is education. We really do have to educate people on what we're doing and why we're doing it, and these simple changes of things that we're doing within our farming practices and how easy they are. So there's obviously lots of challenges, as Charlotte mentioned. There's lots of challenges to overcome throughout all of this, and there'll be some more for us as things progress. But for the time being, things are really positive, and it has such a massive impact on wildlife. What next? So I guess one of the areas that we want to look at is connectivity. I think Charlotte's presentation summed it up beautifully, really, that without connectivity in our landscape, it's all well and good having these areas that are rich in wildlife, but we need wildlife to be able to move through areas. Our countryside should be rich, and what we hope from our 3-prong approach is that we're showing that you can manage land in such a way that we can farm it and we can still produce food, and that we can leave areas that we don't need to farm, we can leave them for wildlife and do something good for wildlife. And there are areas that we do need to manage in traditional conservation terms because of their species richness and diversity. And obviously rewilding wilding is growing in popularity, and there's just a few points there on the map, the blue points with Westacre and Sandringham, a few of the others, and Holcombe, that are all sort of starting projects along the same line. And what we hope is that we can then persuade our neighbours and other farmers to take on some of these farming approaches, and let's have some really great connected landscape through our farming regimes. And I think it's hard not to mention that you may well have seen recently in the press and the media, and hopefully some of you may have participated in an online survey, but we are working very closely with the Roy Dennis Wildlife Foundation, with Roy Dennis and Dr. Tim McCrill, to hopefully reinstate white-tailed eagles back to the Norfolk landscape, a project that we've been working on. I think it's very important to point out that this is a project that's been proposed by the landowners here, the Buskell family and the estate, and it's us that are investing in the money. So it's not anything that we're receiving from public money, if you like, to do this. It's something we feel like we've got an opportunity to do something really beneficial for wildlife, and in much the same way as conservation, you kind of have to strike while the iron's hot, and while there's growing popularity and interest, it seems like now's a really good time to do that, you know. And as Charlotte said, so many people have realised that during this lockdown that we need nature, we need wildlife, and I think, you know, a part of that is we also need inspiring and big things like eagles occasionally to really gee that interest up and spread that message a bit further. So yeah, that's what we've been working on. And, absolutely, if any of you want to engage with us, please do. You know, we are engaging with so many groups and organisations, hundreds of farmers, and yeah, we really do want to showcase the work we're doing and show the great stuff that we're doing, and work with as many different people as we can. So there we go.
Thank you very much indeed, Lloyd. That's a smashing good news story, I think, and it sounds like it'll become a better and better news story as we move on. So
we do hope. We do hope.
Yeah. In these rather dark days of pandemics and all the rest of it, it's lovely to see.